Hello, Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, flight arrivals at Armstrong International increased by one extra landing this week as Airforce One touched down for a quick visit by the president. We will see what he saw and what the message is for infrastructure improvement. We'll also get a COVID update and look at the restaurant industry where more tables are open but still too few employees to fully service them. Our Future Watch segment looks at efforts for developing environmentally sustainable neighborhoods. And in the Gulf, the search continues for the missing crewman from the Seacor Power lift boat disaster. That plus what we have learned from ongoing investigations of the city's drainage system. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Katie Moore, news anchor and reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio. First going over to E for the latest on COVID, our update on that.
Well, the governor had his usual press conference during the week, and things were overall pretty optimistic. Now, nobody's ever totally optimistic when they talk about things. You know, it's always be on alert. Things can get worse, but in general, things were encouraging. Louisiana has the 5th lowest hospitalization per capita in the nation, so they were very encouraged about that. They have expanded their base to include more ethnic groups, and 3.9% of the people who received the vaccinations are Hispanic. These are self-identified Hispanics, out of a total population of self-identified Hispanics of 5.3. So if they compare to the national average, that's good too, and so you have a higher rate of that. Something else is you're starting to see now a lot of little programs coming into effect. One, to get more people to get vaccinated and to deal with it. There's this thing called LA Wallet, and this has been around a couple of years now. It's like a digital driver's license that you can use without having the actual driver's license, but they have expanded the capacity on that too to put your vaccination information on that, which is really useful because it's going to start happening that some of us are going to start losing, the little card we received, or we're going to go somewhere and someone says, "Let me see your card," and say, "I didn't know how to have it." And so now you can go to the app there and get the information put on that. So I think that's a major thing. So you won't be waiting at the airport, not being able to get the plane because you forgot your card. So those are good things.
But, you know, it is a really good thing. I mean, it certainly is looking better. And once again, everyone still does need to be cautious. But the vaccine hesitancy has really, really slowed down our rate of vaccinations to the point where we're really pretty low in the rankings in the nation, right? In terms of people getting vaccinated, having been vaccinated.
Well, it's a nationwide problem, though. It's certainly not a phenomenon that's limited to Louisiana. And it's not for lack of trying. I mean, every time you hear these meetings every week, there's these different programs, and there's programs that people can just. One thing that makes me wonder is a lot of programs, especially those dealing with poorer people, that part of what you have to do is go on the internet, and I just wonder always about the capacity right there to be able to reach people. But there are, social agencies and everybody trying that, and the state. One thing I wonder, I mean, you have a state legislature, so you got somebody representing everybody in the state on a district level. I mean, maybe the state legislators could develop programs, but the sincerity is out there, and they really want to get to people.
Right, and having people vaccinated just continues to open up everything more. So I know there's hopes that by July we'll be pretty well opened up.
Yeah, I think it needs to happen because there's going to be some other stories I can talk about. But, what's happened is that the good news is that things are opening up. The bad news is that the cost of it is really quite major, and we've seen things like lumber and all these other things, how it's been driven. We'll talk a little bit later about what's happening in the restaurant industry. So yeah, even once it opens up, it's going to be a while to kind of catch up to where we were.
Right, but our hospitalization rate is really down and death rate down. I mean, all of that is really very, very positive news, and that's the way we want to see it move, is down as far as those rates are concerned. All righty, thanks a lot. Dave, we got a big visit yesterday from the President of the United States, so New Orleans and also Southwest Louisiana.
Yeah, President Joe Biden came and made 2 stops on his tour to promote his infrastructure plan, the more than $2 trillion bill he is trying to convince every Democrat to vote for. He'd love some Republican support, but it's extremely unlikely he'll get a single Republican vote. So he's out stumping to try to convince all of those within his own party to vote for this plan, while the Republicans have come up with a smaller, hundreds of billions of dollar plan to address infrastructure needs. So he went to Lake Charles first, and he stood before the bridge on the I-10 and discussed how it was one of thousands and thousands of bridges across this country that is past its useful life, that is not supposed to be there anymore, and is starting to run into questions about structural capacity across the country of the roads and bridges. And he used that as one example. He came to New Orleans then to talk about sewerage, water, drinking water, and drainage. He went to the Sewerage and Water Board, where officials there, including the mayor and top execs from the Sewerage and Water Board, had an opportunity to make the case that if he can get his bill through, that it should include a lot of money for New Orleans, with a century-old system that has a horrible track record and is literally falling apart. The president spoke in Lake Charles. He talked at length about the needs that the nation has for infrastructure improvements, and talked about putting people back to work through his programs to rebuild roads and bridges and drainage and water systems and internet capacity, to expand that across the country. But the Republicans have issues with it because that bill also contains many things that are not historically considered spending on infrastructure, and it seems to be more of just kind of a laundry list of wishes that the Democratic Party has had for years and years now to fund projects that liberals have identified with, while conservatives don't care for them. But it was an opportunity also for the Republican mayor of Lake Charles. He got 7 minutes with the president, which in presidential time is a lot of time, to make the case that we had the 5th worst hurricane in U.S. history hit Lake Charles, Louisiana. Yet there's been no spending bill that followed the initial relief. Here in New Orleans after Katrina, we saw spending bill after spending bill and programs designed to bring New Orleans back and to chart a road home, and all of this money that followed that. Lake Charles hasn't seen any of that 9 months later, and they were hit by 2 hurricanes, winter storm, which was also declared a disaster, and the pandemic. So they're begging over there for more federal money. So they're hoping that the president will make that a priority moving forward as well. And here in New Orleans, like we said, officials talked to him at length about addressing the crumbling infrastructure.
Yeah.
When you talk about bridges, Louisiana is really loaded with bridges. You know, we know the ones along the interstates, but there's a lot of all the bayous and little tributaries, and they all have bridges. And so there's lots of them throughout the state. And when I drive around and I see them, I said, yeah, they kind of look like they need a little work.
Yeah, the governor said that we are $14 billion backlogged in projects to repair crumbling roads and bridges. And he says that our roads and bridges currently get a D rating. And if we wait any longer, that we're going to drop to an F. And we're going to see where we're going to have problems with even keeping some bridges open, and others that as they get further and further beyond what they were designed to do, will there be a lot of questions about if structurally there are going to be problems moving forward. He's used some of the initial money from the last stimulus package to address some of this in Louisiana, and there will be some road and bridge work associated with that, but clearly there'd be a whole lot more if the president can get this passed.
Well, certainly infrastructure improvements, the need to fix up our really dilapidated infrastructure across the country is something that both sides of the aisle agree on. I mean, this is a real thing.
Yes, and I think most observers think that eventually the Democrats will be able to push through a plan, but it's going to be a smaller plan. It's not going to be over $2 trillion. It may be, though, not as small as $600 billion as some Republicans want. It may fall somewhere in the middle, but it's likely going to pass, like we said, without a single Republican vote. So the Republicans at this point are introducing their plan, and they're campaigning against the president's plan because they're already looking ahead to the midterm elections and hoping that enough Americans agree with them that we can't continue spending trillions and trillions of dollars and keep going further and further into debt, and that it's time to start being at least reasonable about the spending while also addressing the issues of infrastructure, of getting people back to work, and of moving the country forward. On
the other hand, I can see where some of the Republicans might be kind of vulnerable, especially to voters who don't understand all the costs. You know, for an opponent to say, look, he was your incumbent and he was against building new roads in building new bridges.
Well,
I mean, Huey Long built his political base on building new roads and bridges. I mean, it's great populist father.
Well,
So-
it's one person's pork is another person's bringing home the bacon. And,
Right.
So you complain in every other district, this is pork, this is unnecessary spending. But you bring home a major project like that, and your voters love you, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, if it's something that they think benefits them and improves their community.
Okay, and something that certainly is a major project and will be a major project for a while is the Sewerage and Water Board and that equipment, the drainage issue, and then also water. And that's where the president did go. He toured that. And he heard from the leader of the Sewerage and Water Board system that this could fail at any time.
Yeah, and the message there was, let's rebuild the whole thing.
Yeah.
Let's be a whole new facility, because we don't want to work off of century-old turbines to generate the electricity, century-old pumps to drain the water out of the streets when they fill up, and a century-old system of pipes and pumps delivering the water to people's homes,
Right.
with questions about the safety of those pipes. And we already know that we're losing a ridiculous amount of the water that comes from the Sewerage and Water Board, just seeps right out because so many pipes are broken. Not to mention the sewage that leaves our homes in New Orleans is draining out under the streets as well, and that's not a health issue that you can underestimate as in terms of its impact.
Right. Well, let's go over to Katie right now, because Katie and her colleagues over there at Channel 4 and Eyewitness News have done extensive investigation into the Sewerage and Water Board, the drainage system, the water system here. Just remind us some of the stuff that you found out about it and what the needs are.
Sure. Yesterday, he couldn't have picked a better place to stop for David Hammer and I to talk for a couple of hours on the air about something, because we've been investigating it for so long and we've been digging into it so deeply over the years. I think what's interesting about the president's visit is that he really focused on the water infrastructure in what the Sewerage and Water Board does. I mean, they have three different areas that they really focus on: the wastewater, the sewage, the drinking water portion of what they do, and then drainage, which is the area that we largely focused on when we did our down the drain investigation, which, is something that's ongoing here at Channel 4. But, the drainage portion is just one prong of that three-pronged beast, all of which have significant problems. And one thing that David and I were talking about on the air yesterday was the fact that the power generation capabilities and capacities and the way that it's generated at the Sewerage and Water Board really is the Achilles heel of that whole system, because all of those three arms of the Sewerage and Water Board depend, at least in part, on their ability to generate power. One of the areas that the president talked or visited over the Sewerage and Water Board yesterday was the places where they had drinking water pumps, which we've talked a lot about the drainage pumps, but the drinking water pumps have had issues as well, both those that pump water out of the river and into the system and those that pump the water out to people's homes and businesses. Now, they've been getting some federal money to fix those, and that's why they stopped and took a look at some of those pumps to show off sort of the work that they have done and the progress that they have made. And they also visited that water tower, which is a project that's less than 5 years old. We talked about that in our Down the Drain series as well, because we didn't have water towers in the city of New Orleans. I mean, I know anyone who's driven around any rural part of this country sees water towers just about in every town. That's how you know you're in a different town, right? Well, the city of New Orleans didn't have them until very recently, and they got a huge amount of money from FEMA to build that water tower that's over at the Carrollton plant. So the president stopped by and looked at that. And why that's significant is that that water tower keeps the water pressure up. And we know that if the power system goes down, which I mentioned before, as it has during heavy rain events, as it has whenever, even on a sunny day when we have high winds, and we can't depend on energy as a backup, if the water pressure goes down and if we can't push the water out to keep that pressure up, then you need that water tower to maintain that pressure in the system so that the drinking water doesn't get contaminated. So those are some of the things that we were talking about as the president was making his way through the Sewerage and Water Board plant yesterday. And, there's such a huge need from the Sewerage and Water Board. I think one of the problems that they might have is that our senators, including Senator Kennedy this week, talked about the fact that he doesn't want to write a blank check to the Sewerage and Water Board. He feels like some of the money has been misspent, which David and I have really documented over the years. Some of it has been wasted. I think that that's fair to say. And I think that, there's going to be a lot of oversight of it if the Sewerage and Water Board does manage to capture some of that infrastructure money.
And millions and millions and millions have been spent already, which you guys have documented. But to go in and try to replace this whole system, that would be an enormous amount of money. But it's
absolutely. I think that's pie in the sky. But I think they can hope for some new turbines for sure, which, David has talked about the fact that, they could have bought new turbines for how much they've spent trying to repair some of the ones that are still continuing to break down. So it's just a question of whether or not they're going to spend the money wisely and buy the right new equipment. And Corban also talked about the fact that he really wants a state-of-the-art filtration system for our drinking water in order to get contaminants out of it, because there are still some concerns, I guess, which is what he hinted at yesterday, about whether or not those contaminants are getting out as efficiently and with the technology that we have these days that can really make sure that our water is better to drink for people.
Okay, well, we'll see where this infrastructure bill goes and, how it's going to benefit our region. Thanks a lot, Katie. Really appreciate it. Dave, let's go on over to you. We see restaurants opening all over town more and more, greater capacity. People are anxious to go out to eat. Mother's Day coming up this weekend, but restaurants are facing a problem.
Yeah, I talked to Stan Harris, the president and CEO of the Louisiana Restaurant Association, and he said flat out, they do not have the staff they need to handle daily demands right now. With restaurants are theoretically open at 100% now across the state, even in New Orleans now, but they can't handle a 100% capacity crowd like they used to. And that's why you're seeing many restaurants still having limited menus, so because they don't have the kitchen staff that they need. You're seeing many restaurants closing earlier than they had in the past, or closing more days than they had in past before the pandemic, because they do not have the staff to fully do what they want to do. And he talked about if you do go out to a restaurant, whether it's for a regular day or Mother's Day, which is the single busiest day of the year for restaurants, that you have to bring what he called your COVID courtesy with you, because it's not going to be the same experience that New Orleans restaurants are used to delivering. It can't be the same level of service to the same number of people, because it's not, he said, you can't flip a switch and suddenly say, okay, you're 100% capacity, you can go back to full operations, but the workers aren't there.
Well, why aren't they there? What's going on with that?
Well, it's multiple reasons. One, when the pandemic began and all the restaurants either closed or went down to just delivery or curbside, they didn't need as many people working there, and they didn't have the money to pay as many people as they had before. Now, the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, helped with that and allowed them to keep paying some employees who were not coming to work so that at least they could keep them on their payrolls and keep them employed. But more and more, workers chose to either collect the enhanced unemployment, which continues through the fall from the federal government, where the average restaurant worker makes more money to sit at home than they do to go to work, which is very hard to compete with if you're a restaurant owner, because if you want to offer more than that enhanced unemployment pays, well, that money's got to come from somewhere. So then you got to decide, okay, am I going to raise the the menu prices, which are already stressed because of shortages at chicken processing plants. So there's a shortage of chicken, so it's more expensive. Shortages of beef, shortages of all of the things that they use to make the dishes that they serve us. Plus, Louisiana, and specifically New Orleans, were amongst the last markets to open up to the extent they are now. So many people who chose not to get unemployment or couldn't qualify for whatever reason, but wanted to go back to work, they went to Florida, they went to Texas, they went to other states where there was work, where the restaurants were open, and where they could make a living if they couldn't get the unemployment or chose not to get the unemployment. So now, they had a job fair this week where they were hiring restaurant workers, from managers all the way down to bussers, and everybody in between, hostesses, servers, chefs, sous chefs, on the spot. You went to the convention center, they gave you an interview, and a lot of times they said, want the job? Come on,
Yeah.
Let's go to work tonight, because that's how badly they need people. And it's not just the restaurants, it's the entire hospitality industry, it's hotels, it's museums, it's attractions. And in fact, in New Orleans right now, there are 50,000 listed open jobs. That's never happened before in Greater New Orleans, that there's been that many job openings recorded at once.
Yeah, a lot of help wanted signs, on doorways of restaurants and such. So at any rate, COVID courtesy, huh? We have to be patient. and enjoy Mother's Day.
Yeah, they said you might want to order and take it home because at least then they can plan it, they can prepare it.
Yeah.
If you come pick it up or have it delivered, you can get that restaurant food without having to deal with the long waits and the staffing shortages.
All right, Dave, thanks a lot. Dawn, over to you. Sustainable neighborhoods, what are we talking about there?
We're talking about a lot. Living with water, Sewage and Water Board. We're talking about drinking water. Now we're talking about storm water and all the water that surrounds us at all times. The state across the board and the city are all involved in trying to create sustainable neighborhoods, sustainable living. We talked several weeks ago about the return of the blue bikes. That's just one way, get more transportation that is carbon neutral, that isn't hurting the environment at all, but that is getting people to work. The blue bikes are coming back September 1st. Governor Edwards is working on a plan to make the whole state carbon neutral by 2050 and is soliciting proposals right now. What would you do? How would it affect people? What would it cost people? What's the offset of cost? What's the offset of jobs? That's a plan for the state. A plan in our area is the new Pontilli neighborhood. I have to look at my notes for this one. Pontilli Neighborhood Stormwater Network. It's a combination of Pontchartrain Park and Gentilly, therefore Pontilli. It's a $15.5 million FEMA and HUD project where it really is reducing stormwater on the streets. They have changed up the neutral grounds, and instead of being planted like a hill, it's planted more in a V shape. So the green area in the middle of the road is actually draining water faster, and it's being held in the ground and growing plants, and it holds 8 million gallons of stormwater that would otherwise be on the streets and need to be pumped off of those streets. It's one of the first living with water philosophy projects to actually be built in the area, using the natural resources as a way to absorb more rainwater instead of worrying about pumping it out all the time. Let's keep it and live with it. And there's permeable pavement on the sidewalks and in some of the parking lots in that neighborhood. And these are neighborhoods that traditionally flooded during heavy rains. In the last couple of weeks of heavy rains, they didn't flood. The mayor and others cut the ribbon on this project late in April.
Dawn, it seems like there's something sort of like that along Canal Boulevard, a submerged neutral ground. Actually, it's a really kind of pretty area where it's recessed.
Well, and used to be a city of bayous, and there were pretty areas and living with the water, just like they do in Venice. And we're getting back to that a little bit, back to it's going to be here anyway. Let's find a way to have it live with us instead of trying to just pump it out all the time. To that end, there's also new kinds of home building going on in our area. There's a new company that's launched called Shibusa. And Shibusa is a Japanese word, but it's the kind of architecture, it's affordable, sustainable homes where all of the building materials are shipped to the site at the same time, design build, so it's built faster, which is environmentally friendly, but they're also using lots of woods and lots of designs where the air quality is really taken into account inside the house.
And where is this being done, Dawn? Where is this being
There are several houses so far. The first one that was done was in the lower 9th Ward. There's a 16-unit development happening in Central City on St. Andrew. There are 2 in Pontchartrain Park, 5 in the 7th Ward. High ceilings, lots of windows, lots of wood. Construction that feels like New Orleans, looks like New Orleans, but is far more sustainable than some older projects. Built with structural insulated panels, or SIP panels, so that it really is airtight, so it's easier to heat and cool.
Okay, different from Make It Right, though. It's different from the whole Make It Right approach.
Much different from Make It Right. It's totally different from the Make It Right project. The CEO of this company said Make It Right was a great idea. As we have now found out, it was somewhat poorly executed.
Yeah.
Here's a great idea where they know the market and the houses are being designed for the weather that we do have and the humidity that we do have. So these houses are going to be built to last. So we should be hearing more from Shibusa over the years and other developers like them.
Okay. A lot of projects going on, and that's certainly what we need to be working toward, is that sustainable neighborhood. Thanks a lot, Dawn.
Meanwhile, there's a lumber shortage.
And the lumber prices are sky high right now, too. Okay, quickly over to David. Just an update now. Seacor, the Power, the lift boat, the disaster, search for crewmen, moving the boat.
There are still some volunteers. It's a much smaller group out there continuing to look for the 7 missing members of the crew of the boat now that we'll be coming up on 4 weeks since it flipped over in the Gulf of Mexico. But what we do know is there's been progress made on beginning the salvage effort, and there's still a lot who believe that those 7 bodies are probably still on board of that vessel. The Coast Guard, along with contractors, moved in this week and began to pump the fuel and the oil and other materials off of the vessel so that they can begin to try and pull it out of the water, either as in one piece or if they have to cut it apart in many pieces. This thing is longer than a football field. It's a huge boat. So they want to try, before they begin the salvage efforts, to minimize the potential for any pollution. So that's the stage they're at now, getting all the fuel, all the oil, and any other chemicals on board off of there as they continue to develop the plan to go ahead and try and salvage the vessel, and hopefully when they do, recover those 7 remaining bodies.
There's no firm timeline, though, as to when they could start doing that.
It's so much dependent on the weather, on the conditions of the sea, and of how long it takes to prepare for the salvage.
All right, Dave, thanks a lot. Okay, guys, other stories. E, let's start with you.
Well, we all remember the baby cakes and how much everybody hated that name. Well, the franchise moved to Wichita, where it became the Wichita Wind Surge, and they have their opening game Wednesday night, and they're playing a team with conceivably a worse name than baby cakes, and that's the Amarillo Sod Poodles.
Sod Poodles.
Okay.
A sod poodle.
Yeah, and they wanted to call them the Prairie Dogs, but that name was taken already, and so they played on that. So the former baby cakes will be playing the Sod Poodles.
Okay, the sod poodles. Yeah, we need to think about that one a little while. Katie, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a story that is going to be airing tonight, actually. It's not mine, it's Mike Pearlstein's, but we all heard about the controversy involving the crew of Knicks around Mardi Gras time. Right. The night that their parade was supposed to roll, a class action lawsuit was filed. This crew has really been through a lot of turmoil, and Mike Pearlstein is digging deep into the financial questions. What happened with this massive sisterhood that has basically just fallen apart over the last several years. So he's going to dig deep into the crew of Knicks, and we'll hear more about that on Eyewitness News
All
tonight.
right, thanks a lot. Don?
New Orleans Public Schools is launching a strategic planning effort to see where they go in the next 4 years. Their first meeting, public meeting, May 17th, which is a week from Monday, from 5:30 to 7:30.
All righty, thanks. Dave?
William Tate IV is preparing to take over as LSU's new president. He is the first ever black president of LSU in the school's 150-plus year history, and the first in the SEC.
All right, very good. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining us from your different locations, and thank you all for joining us, too. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.